It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are presenting our second short fiction roundup.
Because it is important to keep up with short fiction, because short fiction, even though it's not always as immersively satisfying as a novel, is, shows us what the next generation of spec fic writers are doing now.
Indeed. And what they're doing, much like the current crop of SF writers, is Wizards versus Lesbians. Although, lesbians at least. I'm not sure about the Wizards part in pretty much any of these. But lesbians continue to be a hot topic. So, the three stories that we are going to be covering here are Our Souls to the Moon by there's a number of ways this can be pronounced, but I'm going to go with Tamara Jarre. Then we have Onward by Bonnie Jo Stufflebeam, and there's only one way to pronounce that.
We hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's plaudits, incidentally, to Bonnie Jo for an incredible name. And finally, we have A Series of Stakes by Veena Jamin Prasad. That's my best attempt at that.
Jamin, I don't know what the tones are, but...
Yeah. That's what I thought I said, but you know how this tends to go. I like a certain kind of Chinese food from the province whose capital is Chengdu. But when I pronounce its name, you see, Alexis attempts to murder me. I started pronouncing it wrong as a joke, but when I tried to do it right, I always misspoke. So here we go. My heart's in my mouth. Is it Sichuan? Oh no. So, we're going to do these in the order in which we discuss them. Remind me, do we do one big spoiler zone and then go on to the stories, or do we...
Yes, I feel like that's the more... I don't remember what we did last time, but I feel like that's the more efficient way to do it.
All right. Do you want to do the plot of the first story?
Sure. So...
That's good, because I might have a hard time summing this one up.
Factory girls on Neptune, very oppressed factory girls on Neptune, which has a psychotropic moon, which gives you blissful hallucinations or something, if you can view it through a telescope, which is why telescopes are strictly controlled. One of the two girls has moonstone eyes, which are quite literally moonstones, and this also brings her magical powers. And she is going to sacrifice something to the mysterious cult that has been recruiting Moonstone Eye girls so that, as the title says, their souls can go to the moon. Yep.
Good job on avoiding the spoiler question mark there. Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
It has lesbians, and it has...
It has a cult.
It has a cult. It has a magical cult.
And it has a, ruling class. Yeah. So two wizard adjacent things that don't really add up to a wizard, but we're going to go with it.
Mm-hmm. I would say that for this one, if you read The City in the Middle of the Night, and you thought, what I want is for this to be short and pretty, then this is definitely the story for you. It's got your, you know what I mean? It's got your sort of weird grungy fantasy or weird grungy science fiction planet with class politics and oppression and difficult day-to-day life, and just sort of gets stranger and stranger.
Yeah, I'd say that's reasonable. This one is very poetic. If
yes.
You like your short stories poetic.
Yes, this one is very weird, very pretty.
Shall we move onward to Onward at this point? Or
I guess should we do the why should you and why shouldn't you read this one?
I think you just said why we should read it.
Why you shouldn't read it. It's very weird. I didn't feel like the ending was particularly satisfying. And there's a whole host of content warnings, which we don't even need to provide because the magazine Strange Horizons will helpfully provide them in a little expando window for you. So you can just look it up and read the content warnings yourself.
Yes. My why you shouldn't read this is that it's kind of a nothing burger. There's a lot of style, but not much to it. Yes, so onward to onward at this point.
Oh, I suppose we should also declare a vague conflict of interest here in that in that Tamara Dre is a former Odyssey Workshop classmate of recurring podcast guest P.H. Lee.
Gotcha. And P.H. Lee provided us with the short stories in this instance. So, yes. But thankfully, I don't know this person, so I am more than happy to dispense.
Neither do I.
Harsh criticism, or not.
Onward by Bonnie Jo Stufflebeam.
Okay. Shall I take
Your
the
turn.
plot on this one? Okay. So this is a world in which the humans are served by sentient pack animals, which are bound to the will of their riders. And there's a sort of nested doll motif of bondage and liberation from various different levels of bonds as the main character breaks out of her equit riding. That's the name of them. They're equits.
Like equine.
Yes, exactly. State by getting married to a foreign noblewoman. But that in and of itself isn't enough. And we have to go further beyond Queer Desires, the revolutionary moment, which involves a trip to an alternate world, which is almost entirely dead, and where there are intelligent tree people. Why you should read this one? I think that this is the most successful of the three that we're doing, to my mind.
Oh, really?
Yep. I'm 100% certain of that.
Man, he sure is confident about that take. I'm sure by the end of the episode, he won't have changed his mind completely.
I felt like the third one was a better story, but
fair enough. And it's sort of, I like the way that it deals with the queer desire as the revolutionary moment theme, because I think that's sort of the core of this one. I don't think that it answers it in a particularly good way, but I just I think that the way that it handles it is amusing. And there's some good, like, Xeno romance, if that's your cup of tea.
There is, and it's very cute, I think, the Xeno romance.
As to why shouldn't you read it? It seems like you liked it less than I did, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I again found the ending of this one really dissatisfying. And sufficiently so that I felt like, the beginning of the story and even the middle of the story were promising more than the story was able to finally deliver on.
Yes, I would agree with that, but I would also say that it's one of those things where, the author wasn't going to be able to come up with a solution to this problem. And so
yeah, that's
I'm
fair.
fine with
it's
them
just
struggling with it.
The thing is, I was just very disappointed, and it made me reread the story. I went back and reread the story, and I think on the reread, I liked the story a lot less.
Gotcha. All right. Finally, out to the series of stakes. You want to do the plot, or shall I?
Sure. So, Helena Lee Yuanhui of Splendid Beef Enterprises is a beef forger. She 3D prints fake beef. And she is forced by a creepy, mysterious stalker man to take on a giant order where instead of providing, stew beef and sliced beef, she has to provide a series of steaks. And which forces her to get an apprentice or an assistant, and then they have some adventures.
Yep. I have nothing to add to that. Why should you read this book?
It's fun.
I mean, story.
It's fun. I found it sort of fast-paced and entertaining, and just very charming.
Yes, this one is a feather-light comedy, and and how much you like it will depend on how much you like the jokes. And I thought it was pretty lame, unfortunately. But yeah, no, that's entirely a sort of that's entirely a sense of humor kind of thing. But I think it's important to point out that this is a funny short story that's supposed to be funny.
Yes.
Yes. Cool. Shall we go? Shall we go into it then? Shall we head into the spoiler
Yes,
zone, having
let's.
dispatched these three? Oh,
Yes.
as far as wizards and lesbians go, I rushed us past for Bonnie Joe. For Onward, there are we go beyond lesbianism here. There's a lot of but yes, there are women who love women in here. I'm not, and there are imperial patriarchal powers, no actual wizards.
I would argue that the wife is a wizard.
Yeah, but they don't really fight. I mean, they sort of process.
Honestly, that was part of the disappointment for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to be interested in circling back to that. In this one, yes, lesbians, implied, not, but her assistant is a lesbian. We know that much.
Yes.
Or at least that she's dated women, and there's a frisson between them, but that's as much as you get.
There's heavily implied lesbianism, and there's a guy who really wants to be a wizard.
Yeah, there's a capitalist shithead who, and shithead is a really great word for him for reasons which we will get into. He's the wizard figure, but he's kind of a chump.
Yes.
He's your chump wizard.
Yes.
But, let's see. Oh, and I guess we do have to talk about spoiler or content warnings for the second and third book, since their publications have not seen fit to provide those. For the second one, slavery, genocide, and relationship problems.
I'm not sure if you really need a content warning for that, but yes.
Yeah, but relationship problems that are informed by class. And in the third one, a lot of kind of distressing descriptions of meat.
And somewhat it's somewhat ambivalent towards organized crime.
Yeah, there is a little bit of these heroic criminal organization kind of, or not, if not heroic, then at least
they're not heroic, but they're at least cool, right?
Yeah. And yeah, this is unfortunately something that is so common as to be almost invisible.
Yes, but I'm calling it out regardless.
Understandable. Cool. Shall we finally, now that I've remembered our entire format, and I do apologize, it's been a while since we've done one of these.
Since we've done like an actual straight up non-special episode.
Yes, off to the spoiler zone we go. Spoiler zone. Okay, so our souls to the moon.
Yeah.
I remember it's been a moment since I read this one, since we were originally going to do this episode a little while ago. And I remember mostly like cool images from this one. There's a lot of really cool images. Like I like the unnecessary elaborate eye removal machines.
Yes.
That's like some rock solid, sort of id shaking, science fiction fantasy stuff. The squalor, as you pointed out, was very squalorous.
It was. It was very like convincingly squalorous, and it does a very good sort of science fiction-y job of taking actual ways that people are living now and putting them in a science fiction future, so that you can go, oh, how horrible. But like people already live in places where it's so polluted that it hurts to breathe.
Yes.
People are the thing where people are getting lined up for their pat down happens at Amazon factories. And the obviously plenty of drug addiction.
So I guess my issue with this one is that it seemed very worthy, but I didn't get it. Like, I didn't understand if it was meant to be like okay, here's a sort of just a slice of life, almost portrait of living in a, in a third world country on Neptune, essentially. Although increasingly, first of all, the term third world is deprecated and should not be used at this point, but
Because
it's
we
kind
live
of
in a
everywhere.
post-Cold War power
Yeah,
system. Right, and
we've managed to democratize, poverty level wages and horrible working conditions to every country in the world, as far as I can tell, with the possible exception of Switzerland.
and all three of the things that I just listed are all things that have happened in the U.S. So
Indeed. So yeah, no. Listen to my brain work out loud. It's a feature for you guys as I think of the smarter thing that I should have said. But I don't really get what's going on past that.
so I
There
have
is-
to say, oh, you go ahead.
I mean, there is something to the whole, like, if you are beautiful enough, you can get a ticket out of this situation by being Epsteined, basically, or local equivalent. You can be set free of your squalor and brought to a place of much better working conditions, as long as you're willing to be used by rich old men. But I don't really get the moon cult part. I mean, are they recruiters for this purpose? What is that bliss moon? Is that just drugs? I mean, I don't want. I understand that one thing doesn't just have to mean one thing, but I just really
Right.
left this one without really understanding anything about what was going on or what it meant.
I really feel like the issue with this story is that it is either too short or too long.
Sure.
Partly because if you could shorten it, you could cut it at various places. You could cut it before their souls actually go to the moon, and that's one story. Or you can cut it when Beamy abandons her best friend who has given her eyes to get them to the moon, and because she's overwhelmed by bliss.
Yeah, I think them then finding each other again sort of cuts off the premise at the knees.
Right, but if it had been expanded a little bit more, you could have gone somewhere else with it.
Right, exactly.
So I feel like part of the issue with this story is that either it, got cut down too far, or it had an ending that doesn't work tacked on.
There's definitely a trope in stories like this where the thing that you lose to get out of the gutter is exactly the thing you'd want when you're free. It's like the gift by O. Henry if you sold your soul and your wife got you a knife sharpener. I'm not sure that works.
Yeah, I think there might have been a must we condemn our lesbians to this horrible fate, because that's not really what the prevailing mood is right now, sent about this one. Even though, given the logic of the story itself, there doesn't really seem to be any other likely outcome.
Right.
So is the bliss moon actually meant to be like... I mean, that doesn't sound like drug addiction to me.
No, I do not think that the bliss moon is drug addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue that the bliss moon represents how when you get the thing you want, it can make you sort of lose touch with yourself.
Sure.
It can also just be like the way that people get, people cling to each other and then they get selfish and self-centered and drop each other.
There is that, yes.
It was like I felt like as I was reading this story, it worked when they were all about to go to, if it had cut off right before they go to the moon, it's left ambiguous. Honestly, it's still kind of left ambiguous, right? Are they actually being sent to the moon, or are they just having this like weird hallucination?
Yeah, I think that's part of like why I gravitated toward calling it like a sort of a third worldy, or a situation wherein there might be a promised land to escape to. You might sell your eyes to get to go to America in the back of somebody's truck.
Right.
mean,
And I mean, and I think that, one of the things the story does do a good job of is making it sort of clear from the beginning that there's no promised land to get to.
yes.
And that when you go to the promised land, it's actually weird and horrible.
I mean, yeah. I mean, as long as if you construe like unending bliss to be weird and horrible.
I mean, I read it, like, the thing is that I read it and I can see how it's supposed to be unending bliss, but, like, it still sounds kind of horrifying from the outside.
Yeah, no, it's definitely meant to be, unnerving. Sort of like a shock to the system in a way that, going from a situation like this to a situation of like lavish wealth might be.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I still don't think that that's quite it, because part of the thing here is that they're not going to a promised land, right? I mean,
Right.
they're not going back to Earth or whatever. They're going to the weird hallucinogenic moon. I mean, part of what I think is interesting about the story is that it kind of leaves it open-ended as, are they dying or not?
Yeah.
And again, I
No,
think
there's certainly a way to read this where this is religion. They died. This is heaven. This is the pie in the sky that they got when they died after the
right, but it's not.
horrible
But
legal conditions.
except that, like, it's not a thing that they actually believed in.
Yeah.
So
Which is where the
again,
fun ice scooping machines come in.
which is where the fun ice scooping machines come in, and there's all the like weird, like, it is. I think it is interesting that the cultists sound like girls, are like immortal factory girls, who want
Right.
to rescue Earth's moon from human colonists.
Yeah, that was like, again, shorter or longer, please. I mean,
Right, and part of this is that
like if you just view this purely as a mood piece, why not? It's like if if this is just like tones and colors and feelings, then sure, that makes sense.
And the thing is, I don't feel like everything needs to be a one-to-one metaphor. And
Of course
to
not.
some degree, I think it's promising that we're getting stories like this, because I do feel like one of the things I'm starting to get a little bit weary of in the Wizards versus Lesbians microgenre is how many things are so obviously a one-to-one metaphor.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I would rather have this.
And so, like,
Again, like interesting failures over boring successes, like in
Right.
terms of like this is a story with a structure, But I just like, I mean, the thing that didn't sit well with me, I guess, is just the brutality of the background pitched against that. Like, it feels, I mean, I think there are ways to communicate that kind of life or that kind of way of life that don't have the weight of like, I'm watching a charity pitch almost, It feels like it has that kind of voyeuristic / exploitative edge when it's talking about how horrible their lives are. And like, these people live in a situation where there's absolutely no possibility for normality or happiness, which
the only thing they can do is trade their eyes to like put themselves into a bliss coma.
right, which even in the worst places and in the most horribly, exploitative situations tends not to be how the lived experience of people day to day is.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like they get fired from the one job and there's absolutely nothing else left for them but to die.
Yeah, which is, I mean, even given the horrifics, even given how horrible things can be in this world, isn't generally the way that human beings are handled. So I think that it's the combination of that sort of like really leaning into the nightmare of it on the one hand, and then using that canvas to paint this sort of poetic escapism. It didn't sit well with me, ultimately.
Yeah, I guess I didn't read the last bit as escapism at all. I mean, there is this sort of dramatic tone shift when they decide to leave, and it is like they're sort of walking out of one story and into a completely different one with weird magical cultists, and rows and rows of eyeless dreaming girls, Um, but and I think that transition isn't entirely successful. But I don't know. I do think that there's something going on here that's more than just a tone piece, I think. Because I think that there's an emotional arc here, which I feel like a tone piece wouldn't have.
Right.
And
it is structured like a story with a beginning, the climax.
It's got a beginning and a middle. It doesn't really have an end.
It doesn't really have an end, but, it has an ending. But but you're right. And I think that this is the reason that this doesn't work for me ultimately is that it feels like it is neither fish nor fowl.
Yes, and I think we occasionally do have stories where one or the other of us really dislike something because of that dissatisfaction.
I wouldn't even say that I really disliked this one. I just didn't feel it didn't leave me with anything,
Yes, other than I thought some of the imagery is very vivid and lasting, but
yeah, no, I like the descriptions of stuff. I like the prose, but I
I was definitely left feeling just sort of dissatisfied and a little bit sad.
Yeah, which is not necessarily unusual in the stuff that we read, but
right. Particularly, I do feel like leaving me feeling dissatisfied and a little bit sad is actually how a lot of short fiction these days goes. Either that or it's a fairly light comedy piece. So yes. That's clearly the zeitgeist in short fiction these days.
Well, we'll get to the comedy piece in a second, but for more dissatisfied and sad.
Right, and I feel like that's this was some of the problems you had with this one. You had with Our Souls to the Moon. I had with Onward. Yeah,
I think that one of the things that I liked more about Onward is, and maybe this is, it doesn't have the problem where it's like this society is fundamentally unjust and therefore everything is awful. It has this society is fundamentally unjust, and so that kind of eats away at me and leaves me hollow inside, and I have to go on a journey of discovering my roots in a very, very, very literal way.
Yes.
And I mean, there is a sort of element of the, white woman discovers injustice to the main character's arc.
Mm-hmm. That's one of my problems with this story.
Which can be, that can be a little bit grating. I think, honestly, the reason that I liked it more was because that I was charmed by the tree creatures.
The tree creatures are super charming. I agree.
And I liked the going into the old world and the idea of, she has to go on to get into a little bit more detail of the plot summary that I give, she gets into this relationship with this, higher class woman. The relationship that she has with the higher class woman runs into the problems that you get when you date a rich person.
The higher class woman who is the, best friend of the invading from another world empress.
Yes. So huge class.
Not just a higher class, basically the invading empire's grand vizier.
Yeah. So I mean, but this isn't the first time that we've had a relationship between a person and the invading empire's grand vizier, or even the invading empire's empress,
as we've had, or
a princess or whatever. This seems to be a theme that comes up, and
mm-hmm.
always seems to me to be one degree or another a story about getting into a relationship with somebody who comes from the oppressor class, when you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So, it all goes well for the start, but then there's, things break down because of the obvious problems that come, and the main character is like, why aren't I happy in my normal enslaving these animals life? And so she goes on a vision quest, and this vision quest involves going into a pool and coming out on Earth, probably, where there are these sentient forests who are mostly now dead because of the depredations of the people who were the invading empire.
Very specifically, the love interest, the wife and her best friend Empress.
Right, exactly. So this story obviously lets them off the hook in a way which I imagine you did not enjoy. The wife and the invading Empress. I So the thing that I liked about it is that the idea that your vision quest can just be going and taking a 3-day bath with a tree person,
Who you eventually hook up with.
who you eventually hook up with in a non-specific way, but the real
Fairly specific. I mean, they kiss and then fall wrapped together into the dirt beneath.
Okay, so yes, she fucks the tree person. But it's a female tree person. It's still lesbian, I think.
I believe that the tree person is non-binary.
Yes, this would make sense.
misgendering
Although there
the
are
tree person.
there are some gendered trees, but
Yeah. But this tree person is
This tree
non-binary,
person
and
is
we
non-binary.
respect their, and they
Yes.
use they/them pronouns, and we respect their gender identification.
so yeah, the reason that I liked this story is because it writes in big letters the sort of Le Guin idea that you can't answer the question of how things would work without slavery because you can't imagine what you've never experienced. It's all about, the reason that this woman goes on the trip is to expand her mind and to, open herself to possibilities of how a different world could possibly work, which is something that comes up in Le Guin's work a lot. The thing about this story that I ultimately found hilarious, and which is one of the reasons why I liked it more than the others, and I'm realizing in retrospect that the reason that I liked it more than the others is because I think that I can make fun of it.
Boy, he was sure confident about that take. He seems to be backpedaling furiously, though.
I'm going to be real with you. I wasn't really happy with this crop of stories. But I like
I
this
don't
one
think your tastes run too much towards the current state of short fiction.
But but it's like this points it out. No, queer desire is not the revolutionary moment. We must keep working. And I'm like, yes. And then the answer it provides is no. The revolutionary moment is being in a vegan polytriad where one of the partners is disabled non-binary tree person. That's the revolutionary moment.
Right.
And
It's just like okay. So, and here's the thing, is that this is like the third polyamory is the revolutionary moment story that I've read. And so, by the third time, it starts to stop being quite so...
Charming.
Yeah.
No, I totally get you. It's like, I think the reason why I left this story feeling, better disposed toward it is that I was like, this is predictable. But also kind of charming. And yeah, no, I think that if I were to turn around and look at it like, you're letting the imperialists entirely off the hook.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to complain. I feel like I get to have complaint zone now, the grumpy zone.
Oh, of course.
So not only are you letting the like genocidal pair who destroyed an entire world off the hook, we get an entire little section which is all about like her pain of, being a genocidal world destroyer.
Yes.
The part of
Yes,
the point of the story is that we should feel basically just as sorry for Jimena, who again committed genocide, as we do for Root, who's one of the last surviving members of their species, and as we do for Iris, who is a member of a colony of an imperial territory, but is herself also enslaving these sentient creatures. Like, it feels like, when queer desire as the revolutionary force works for me is when it's more of a personal revolution, and if you can, where it's more like, if your personal revolution can help you break out of your whatever societal preconceptions, that can be an interesting story, or not. Sometimes I'm starting to get a little bit tired of it. But I just don't feel like you can say, oh, the answer to genocide is if the genocider feels really bad about it and then lets her wife get a extra significant other who's a tree person. who's of the class that you genocided. Of the class that you genocided.
Yes.
She destroyed Root's world, and is there like a conversation about what it's going to be like to be part of a polyamorous triad between, the Nazi and the genocide victim? No, there's not.
Right. No, the whole kind of point of the story, if point one can find, is that, as above, so below, none of us are free of sin. Are you who abuses animals really any better than the Nazi? And the answer is yes, you are. There is actually a moral distinction between these two.
Right. Like, actually, PETA is wrong.
Yes.
Factory farming is awful, but it's not a second Holocaust.
Yep. No, you've definitely turned me around on it. I definitely was charmed by this story, probably more than I should have been. And if I'd seen this happen more than once, I would be less charmed by it.
And like, the thing is, I was still fairly charmed by the story. I just, again, this is another one where the ending really spoiled it for me. Where, like, it ends, and the ending is just, everybody is happy now. And they, nothing worth, it's like, well, her first love had shown, like, there's like, it ends like a, after school special.
Yes, I agree. So,
and the message isn't genocide is bad, and maybe people who do it aren't the best wives. The message is, nothing worth having required a sacrifice of self. I guess you don't have to sacrifice yourself when you're married to the genocidal person, because she feels real bad about it, and she doesn't mind that, you're also dating the Jew. Or there's so many genocide victims, right?
Yeah,
we could pick so many.
Just picking the one that are closest to home. The Native American, the Native anywhere,
Like
Root has big, like,
Root is very much a fill-in for all indigenous,
right, exactly,
victims
like,
of genocide.
The pure, always forgiving, in tune with nature, Native person who's literally a tree in this case. You're really.
I'm sorry really to have spoiled the story that was fun for you, but
What I was trying to get to was Rousseau's concept of the noble savage, or the state of nature. Yeah.
It has, the language, it's got some lovely language that isn't as, like, pretty and flowery as Our Souls to the Moon, but is, sort of very clear, and I did like that.
Yeah, it's the best written of the three of them, which unfortunately has some probably more weight for me than it should.
Right, like this one is definitely the best balance between style and substance. It's just that I hate the substance.
And I think that's fair. I think that's entirely fair. So shall we move on to one? Now, a series of stakes. First of all, are you familiar with the Spoon album, A Series of Sneaks?
I'm not.
Well, so that's why the title is that.
Okay.
It's a reference to a band.
I can't imagine that there would be another reason why the title is that. I think that I
assumed the stakes referred to, like, stakes in gambling.
Yeah, it's just the form of words, It's like, it works in that it's like a series of bills. But, I'm imagining, this author looking at her record collection and being like, But we've all been there. I think that I made a mistake when I was reading the story because I didn't get that it was supposed to be a comedy until too far into it.
Oh. I feel like the title is kind of an indication.
I mean, really, I should have gotten it when it talks about beef sliding between someone's parted lips in the first paragraph.
Right. And particularly when that is, specifically supposed to be an example of a non-masterpiece of forgery.
Yes. No, I should have definitely realized that we were in Silly Zone. And the thing that should have confirmed to me that we were in Silly Zone is the idea of vertical beef farming.
The joke when I called him a shithead before is if you stack cows on top of one another, where does all the cow shit go?
Yes. Also, that it's called Splendid Beef Enterprises. I mean, this just feels like such a light. This is a very lighthearted story.
I was just like, I was put off by, it's like we're seeing this on the news feeds. Here are my Google glasses called eye contact. It's just like, it seemed like really bargain basement SF tropes, and I was like, oh, this is tedious.
But again,
not realizing that it was supposed to be lame on purpose. Yes,
right. I mean, come on. Mr. Chen rambles on as Selena sticks the labels on the boxes. Grilliam Shakespeare.
Yeah, no, that is clearly a joke, but also,
Right.
I would certainly not put it past a steak restaurant to call itself that.
Right, exactly. I think that for me, that was the fun of this story, is that I thought it did a good job of walking the line between like silly funny and too absurd.
Yeah,
right?
But
Like,
I was
you
definitely.
can read it going, this is just absurd enough to be plausible, while also being deeply silly.
Sure, the issue with me is that I was like primed to be like, okay, what does this story have to say about the world, having been, having gone through the last two, and then I was like, this world building doesn't make sense, which is not the right way to approach this story. So that being said, it's a fun romp.
It's a fun romp. I mean, and I think one of the things I also like about it is that so many of the stories you read that are set in the near future are either really grim or they're like techno-utopian.
Yes,
and
whereas
this one is like
very recognizable.
The future is like the future, kind of it's going to suck just as much being a art school dropout or whatever as it ever did.
Yeah, 100%. But she's a small business owner. And you can still get a cute girlfriend who's secretly, an escaped gangster, and have like a series and have some like adventures, have some hijinks, and then flee off to wherever. Is it fair to call this girlfriend a manic pixie dream girl? Because she's definitely a dream girl.
She's a little, but she's not. I don't feel like she's quite a manic pixie dream girl because she doesn't exist to solve any of Helena's emotional problems.
No, she exists to solve all of her logistical problems, which is a slightly different.
Again, this is part of why the story worked for me, is that this is so much just a sort of such a lighthearted satire of like of that like techno-utopian, idea of what the future looks like, of this sort of like, post-cyberpunk view of the future.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And so we can
forgive it.
Where the dream girl is indeed somebody who like can solve all your logistical problems and
this is
turn
like
your doodles into a cute logo.
This is like lesbian Mary Poppins, kind of.
This
woman just sort of breezes into your life, solves everything, and now you're going to run away to wherever they're going to run away to together. And,
right. In some ways, this is like. This feels in some ways like a sort of lighthearted anime comedy, where instead of like a struggling, Ronin who's still trying to get into Todai or whatever, it's this art school dropout who's forging beef.
Yeah, I guess because
that's what kind of magical dream girl she is. She's not the like manic pixie dream girl from loser comedies or like indie white guy discovering his emotions things. She's Belle Dandy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Now there's a reference that dates us both.
Oh, I know, right?
I'm looking forward to making the jingle for that one.
Me too. That's part of why I chose that reference.
Open your mind. Oh my god, this was an anime from the 90s with an opening too complex for me to attempt. They really went hard on those 90s anime openings for no reason. Yeah, no, I think ultimately you're talking me around to this being the most successful of the three stories. Partially, I mean, partially just because it doesn't want to do anything particularly, beating, but it makes some good points along the way. I still think
Right.
that kind of the major problem with it is that a lot of the jokes are not quite funny enough for me, or that they don't. That's not a good way to put that. That they don't really land on my sense of humor quite.
Hmm.
The sort of like the swipe at Instagram influencers talking about how T-bone steaks are like a near religious experience, just cutting them. Good satire. The execution did not make me laugh. That kind of thing. Um, I liked the ideas in it. I thought the execution was a little basic. Basically,
Mm.
was my major issue with it, and so I was like, I could use a little bit more style, a little bit more panache, perhaps. But that's
That's
that's not a huge complaint.
That's fair. And I mean, I admit part of this is I think that a lot of my affection for this is that it's set in Nanjing. Um,
Oh yeah, no, I knew that this would have a few shortcuts to your heart in it,
right. It's
and all
it's
and
set in
the
Nanjing. It
Mandarin versus
has
Cantonese stuff, and like
the
all
Mandarin
of
versus
the
Cantonese stuff, including like the fact that her girlfriend's band starts out as canto punk, but Cantonese music is a hard sell, so they end up being a cover band. But then they're called Pomegranate. They have
yeah.
a song called "If Marriage Means the Death of Love, Then We Must Both Be Zombies." Like those, for me, those were the jokes, right? But also for me, those were the jokes that landed. Um,
Yeah, no, I think that it's one of those. Well, this is just a places where our tastes diverge, but I can recognize that this is doing a good job with what it's doing. Kind of a
right.
dealy do.
Or the embarrassment of having your basically magical girlfriend flip through your art book and first she finds the amateur art, and then she finds the like badly marbled beef, and then she finds the tear stains. It's funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I hold my hands up.
And I enjoy that like the wizard figure turns out to be this utter loser.
Yeah, no, that whole thing is good. The payoff is good. That was a smart way to do the payoff. I like
This is I feel like this is the one story that it doesn't have quite as much punch at the beginning, but it actually nails its finish.
yeah, no, you can totally imagine the carnage that ensues. No pun intended. And it's really actually the fact that the stakes are so low, no pun intended, that makes this story work.
Yeah, I think so. Right. If this were supposed to be this like big dramatic, beautifully written story, and I think it's again, I liked the writing by and large. I thought it was sort of, it moves along at a nice pace. It's clear.
Yeah,
It's chatty.
utilitarian.
Um, you know, it's chatty, it's got some energy. Um,
It is about as unlike Our Souls to the Moon as you could imagine.
right. Um, and but again, I feel like this one just, again, you're right. It's part of it sets much lower expectations, but it really nails them. And this is a rare Wizards versus Lesbians story where I walk away being like, oh, that was fun.
Yeah, no, it was. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, no, I think that ultimately you have brought me around to your point of view. I think I was being too curmudgeonly about this one, and too nice about the middle one.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm probably being a little overly harsh towards the middle one, but I was very
It
frustrated.
does represent a viewpoint that one can get very tired of very quickly when one encounters it in the wild.
Yeah, and I just, I feel like I'm willing to forgive a story for being, unsatisfying, being really pretty but unsatisfying. I mean, like, I won't call like Our Souls to the Moon a favorite story of mine, but
Sure.
it had, but I walk away from it with a fairly good memory. I can't quite forgive a story for like when not only is the payoff unsatisfying, but I'm really meant to be, where I really feel like the story wants me to root for, pun intended, not intended, for, shrugging off atrocity.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that there's an energy to it where it's like, like it or not, this is the world that we live in. This is the heritage that we must deal with now. We have to figure out a way to forgive each other and move on. That's a sentiment that I am more agreeable to than a lot of, people of my political persuasion. This story, but in this story, you don't forgive them while it's actually happening, or while the person who did it is still alive and not in jail. So,
and I mean, there's also, I believe in the concept of teshuva, obviously, but you have to actually make amends. You don't get, repentance just by feeling sad. You actually have to do restorative work. And she
Correct.
didn't. She fled. And the only restorative work that she's doing in this story towards the people that she harmed is saying, oh, sure, I don't mind that my wife is dating one of you.
Wow. All right.
We can all soak in the happy queer hot tub together.
Well, I think that's as good a note to end it on as any, honestly. We can all soak in the happy queer hot tub together and don't pay attention to the Nazi on the end of the row.
Sorry, I got a little worked up over this one, but...
That's okay. It's okay. We don't have to let Milo, whatever his face was, into the hot tub.
I feel like we're being a little too mean towards Bonnie Jo Stubblebean. Like, I think what she actually... I mean, the author's dead and all, but I think what she actually wanted was to write this story, the story that you're saying. And I don't think she intended for this other thing to come through. But the way that it does is a, real peeve of mine in fiction. And so I'm more just yelling about, I don't like when this happens.
I got it. And I will say I had more fun reading Onward than I did reading either of the other two stories, and that's just the way it was.
Yep. I definitely had the most fun reading A Series of Stakes because I thought it was fun.
Indeed. So, next week, as I look at the newly updated list, it seems that we are reading The Dawn Hounds, which was recommended to us.
By a Tumblr person.
Indeed. Thank you, Tumblr person. We always appreciate recommendations.
Thank you, Tumblr person, who, if you do listen to podcasts, you know who you are.
Indeed. And, any other housekeeping before we close this one up?
I don't think so. Thanks, everyone, for continuing to listen to our weird podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, no, this continues to be a lot of fun, and we will catch you later.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.